You should resume my book using Audible.
Resuming needful things.
Of insects being broadcast via shortwave. She thought of picking the telephone up with the claws which were now cradled on her chest, having to do it not by grasping, tonight her fingers would not bend at all, but by pressing, like a woman playing the accordion, and suddenly it was too much. Even something as simple as picking up a telephone which had fallen on the floor was too much, and she began to cry. The pain was fully awake again, awake and raving, turning her hands, especially the ones she had bumped, into fever pits. She lay on her bed, looking up at the ceiling through her blurry eyes, and wept. Oh, I would give anything to be free of this, she thought. I would give anything at all. By 10 o'clock on an autumn weeknight, Castle Rock's main street was as tightly locked up as a Chubb's safe. The street lamps threw circles of white light on the sidewalk and the fronts of the business buildings in diminishing perspective, making downtown look like a deserted stage set. Soon, you might think, a lone figure dressed in tails and a top hat, Fred Astaire or maybe Gene Kelly, would appear and dance his way from one of those spots to the next, singing about how lonely a fellow could be when his best girl had given him the air and all the bars were closed. Then, from the other end of Main Street, another figure would appear, Ginger Rogers or maybe Sid Charisse, dressed in an evening gown. She would dance toward Fred, or Jean, singing about how lonely a gal could be when her best guy had stood her up. They would see each other, pause artistically, and then dance together in front of the bank, or maybe you so-and-so. Instead, Hugh Priest hove into view. He did not look like either Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly. There was no girl at the far end of Main Street advancing toward a romantic chance meeting with him, and he most definitely did not dance. He did drink, however, and he had been drinking steadily in the Mellow Tiger since 4 that afternoon. At this point in the festivities, just walking was a trick, and never mind any fancy dance steps. He walked slowly, passing through one pool of light after another, his shadow running tall across the fronts of the barber shop, the Western Auto, the video rental shop. He was weaving slightly, his reddish eyes fixed stolidly in front of him, his large belly pushing out his sweaty blue t-shirt. On the front was a drawing of a huge mosquito above the words Maine State Bird in a long sloping curve. The Castle Rock Public Works pickup truck he had been driving was still sitting at the rear of the Tiger's dirt parking lot. Hugh Priest was the not-so-proud possessor of several OUI driving violations, and following the last one, which had resulted in a 6-month suspension of his privilege to drive, that bastard Keaton, his co-bastards Fullerton and Samuels, and their co-bitch Williams, Castle Rock's 4th selectman was actually a select woman, had made it clear that they had reached the end of their patience with him. The next OUI would probably result in the permanent loss of his license, and would certainly result in the loss of his job. This did not cause Hugh to stop drinking. No power on earth could do that, but it did cause him to form a firm resolution: no more drinking and driving. He was 51 years old, and that was a little late in life to be changing jobs, especially with a long drunk driving rap sheet following him around like a tin can tied to a dog's tail. That was why he was walking home tonight, and one fuck of a long walk it was, and there was a certain public works employee named Bobby Dugas who was going to have some tall explaining to do tomorrow, unless he wanted to go home with a few less teeth than he had come to work with. As Hugh passed Nan's luncheonette, a light drizzle began to mist down. This did not improve his temper. He had asked Bobby, who had to drive right past Hugh's place on his way home every night, if he was going to drop down to the Tiger that evening for a few brewskis. Bobby Dugas had said, "Why, sure, Hubert." Bobby always called him Hubert, which was not his fucking name, and you could bet that shit was going to change too, and soon. "Why, sure, Hubert, I'll probably be down there around 7, same as always." So Hugh, confident of a ride if he got a little too pixelated to drive, had pulled into the Tiger at just about 5 minutes of 4. He'd knocked off a little early, almost an hour and a half early actually, but what the hell, Deke Bradford hadn't been around, and had waited right in. And come 7 o'clock, guess what? No Bobby Dugas. Golly gosh, wow. Come 8 and 9 and 9:30, guess further what? More of the same, by God. At 20 to 10, Henry Beaufort, bartender and owner of the Mellow Tiger, had invited Hugh to put an egg in his shoe and beat it, to make like a tree and leave, to imitate an amoeba and split. In other words, to get the fuck out. Hugh had been outraged. It was true he had kicked the jukebox, but the goddamn George Jones record had been skipping again. What was I supposed to do? Just sit here and listen to it? He demanded of Henry. You ought to take that record off, that's all. Guy sounds like he's having a fucking epileptic fit. You haven't had enough, I can see that, Henry said, but you've had all you're going to get here. You'll have to get the rest of it out of your own refrigerator. What if I say no? He demanded. Then I call Sheriff Penguin, Henry said evenly. The other patrons of the Tiger, there weren't many this late on a weeknight, were watching this exchange with interest. Men were careful to be polite around Hugh Priest, especially when he was in his cups, but he was never going to win Castle Rock's most popular fella contest. I wouldn't like to, Henry continued, but I will do it, Hugh. I'm sick and tired of you kicking my rockola. Hugh considered saying, and I guess I'll just have to kick you a few times instead, you frog son of a bitch. Then he thought of that fat bastard Keaton handing him a pink slip for kicking Charlie got fired, the pink would come in the mail. It always did. Pigs like Keaton never dirtied their hands or risked a fat lip by doing it in person, but it helped to think of that. It turned the dials down a little, and he did have a couple of six-packs at home, one in the fridge and the other in the woodshed. Okay, he said, I don't need this action anyway. Give me my keys. For he had turned them over to Henry as a precaution when he sat down at the bar 6 hours and 18 beers ago. Nope. Henry wiped his hands on a piece of towel and stared at Hugh unflinchingly. No. What the hell you mean, no? I mean, you're too damn drunk to drive. I know it. When you wake up tomorrow morning and see how your head feels, you're going to know it too. Listen, Hugh said patiently. When I gave you the goddamn keys, I thought I had a ride home. Bobby Dukas said he was coming down for a few beers. It's not my fault the numb fuck never showed. Henry sighed. I sympathize with that, but it's not my problem. I could get sued if you wiped somebody out. I doubt if that means much to you, but it does to me. I got to cover my ass, buddy. In this world, nobody else does it for you. Hugh felt resentment, self-pity, and an odd, inchoate wretchedness well to the surface of his mind like some foul liquid seeping up from a long-buried canister of toxic waste. He looked from his keys, hanging behind the bar next to a plaque which read, "If you don't like our town, look for a timetable," and back to Henry. He was alarmed to find he was on the verge of tears. Henry glanced past him at the few other customers currently in attendance. Hey, any of you yo-yos headed up Castle Hill? Men looked down at their tables and said nothing. One or two cracked their knuckles. Charlie Fortin sauntered toward the men's room with elaborate slowness. No one answered. See, you said. Come on, Henry. Give me my keys. Henry had shaken his head with slow finality. If you want to come in here and do some drinking another time, you just want to take a hike. Okay, I will, Hugh said. His voice was that of a pouty child on the verge of a temper tantrum. He crossed the floor with his head down and his hands balled into tight fists. He waited for someone to laugh. He almost hoped someone would. He would clean some house then and fuck the job. But the place was silent except for Reba McIntyre, who was whining something about Alabama. You can pick up your keys tomorrow, Henry called after him. Hugh said nothing. With a mighty effort, he restrained himself from putting one scuffed yellow work boot right through Henry Beaufort's damned old rockola as he went by. Then, with his head down, he passed out into darkness. Now the mist had become a proper drizzle, and Henry guessed the drizzle would develop into a steady, drenching rain by the time he reached home. It was just his luck. He walked steadily onward, not weaving quite so much now. The air had had a sobering effect on him, eyes moving restlessly from side to side. His mind was troubled, and he wished someone would come along and give him some lip. Even a little lip would do tonight. He thought briefly of the kid who had stepped in front of his truck yesterday afternoon and wished sulkily that he had knocked the brat all the way across the street. It wouldn't have been his fault, no way. In his day, kids had looked where they were going. He passed the vacant lot where the Emporium Galorium had stood before it burned down. You so-and-so, Castle Rock Hardware, and then he was passing Needful Things. He glanced into the display window, looked back up Main Street, only a mile and a half to go now, and maybe he would beat the rain before it really